that sense of freedom. You just felt like you were the boss, you know. I was too much of a daredevil. I like to do all the maneuvers and all that. And it's something that gets in your blood. If anybody has ever flown like that, it's there and it never leaves them.
In 1915, the world was at war. The first continental telephone call was made between New York and San Francisco. Charlie Chaplin's sixth film, The Tramp, was released. The young state of Oklahoma was a mixture of Indians, outlaws, white settlers, and oil barons. Along the Chisholm Trail, on the outskirts of Marlow, Oklahoma, a full-blood Chickasaw Choctaw Indian and her husband, a blind businessman, would welcome Eula Pearl Carter into their growing family. Mentored by Wiley Post, she would become the youngest licensed pilot in the nation, a barnstormer and a commercial pilot by the age of 14. Following his legendary exploits in circumnavigating the globe, Post would bestow a unique honor onto young Pearl, inviting her to pilot his world-famous plane, the Winnie Mae. Still, Pearl would not be known much beyond the city limits of her hometown until her late 70s. She ran away and married before reaching adulthood, only to walk away from aviation later for the sake of her children. She struggled to hang on to 2 farms during the Depression, but they would be swept away in the Dust Bowl. The strain of life on the road and the struggle to make ends meet would end her 30-year marriage. But somewhere in Pearl, a determination remained. After rediscovering her heritage, she would become a beloved figure among her Native American family, well before the world would learn of her remarkable past. Pearl came from a long line of strong, determined Native Americans. In 1837, almost 80 years before she was born, the United States government forced her ancestors from their homeland in northern Mississippi along the notorious Trail of Tears. After arriving in Indian Territory, the resilient Chickasaw and Choctaw tribes resolved to reestablish their disappearing way of life and instill into their offspring strong Native American values. Pearl's mother, Lucinda Gibson, was half Chickasaw and half Choctaw, and the granddaughter of Trail of Tears survivor Shimentah. Lucy's family settled in Marlow, one of many tent cities that sprang up overnight as white settlers pushed into Indian Territory. On Saturdays, they went into town, leaving their horses and wagon at the Carter family's livery stable. Although blinded as a teenager, young George was a hardworking, ambitious young man.
George Carter grew up on a farm. He and his brother were involved in harvesting broom corn, and they got a lot of the chaff in their eyes somehow, and it was really bothering them, and their parents sent for the doctor who came, and he looked and he put some kind of drops in George's eyes and one of his brother's eyes that blinded both of them. He went to school for the blind in Arkansas, I believe in Little Rock, and learned how to do just about anything a sighted person could do, really. He moved to the Marlow area as a young man, looking to just start his own career. He met Lucinda, who would become his wife. Everybody called her Lucy. They married. He reinvested virtually everything he made into the company. He acquired land, he acquired leases to lands, so he had lands that he would lease and lands that he bought.
George and Lucy eventually had 5 children: Opalita, Pearl, Arnita, and George Jr. Willie, a Choctaw orphan, became part of the family too. George's success as a businessman afforded the Carter family nearly every advantage. They were among Marlowe's leading citizens. It was the 1920s. Bands and orchestras played a mix of old Southern, popular, folk, and classical melodies, plus military music, and that new sound, jazz.
Her father loved music, so he encouraged the children all to learn how to play musical instruments. And they all played different things, and so they had a little Carter family band. And Pearl played violin and saxophone. And they would go out and play at the little country churches and dances. She was talented in a lot of ways. Her adopted brother taught her how to drive when she was 11 years old, how to drive a car. She went in and sprang that on her father, that I know how to drive and can I have a car? And they talked it over, and there was something about Pearl and her confidence that her father said, yeah, you can have a car.
Big Daddy, my grandfather, Carter, he took a liking to Mother. Now, Mother assisted him due to his blindness.
He bought her a 1927 Durant Roadster, and she drove it to school, took him to work often. She'd take George out to the country to meet with his folks that he worked with and on business trips. Even before, being this pioneer in aviation, there probably weren't too many 12-year-old girls running around driving what was kind of like a sports car.
Far away from Marlowe, both the men and women were gaining wide notoriety flying this imaginative new contraption, the airplane. One sunny afternoon, a fledgling aviator flew his old jalopy of an airplane to Marlowe and landed in George Carter's field. The young man was Wiley Post. Post would become Pearl's hero and mentor.
People turned out to see this contraption, airplane that Wiley flew, and the Carters were among those that went over there to look at this. I guess there was some affinity with Wiley, who was blind in one eye, and George, who was totally blind. They hit it off. Wiley asked George if he would like to be his first passenger now that he had his license to fly solo. It was a 2-seater airplane, and so George did that. And Pearl, of course, observed all of this. She asked Wiley a lot of questions and was so excited.
He took her up, and she said, and then that's when the bug bit me. Said, I knew I had the bug. She said, and I carried it on out.
Every time he came to town, it was routine. She would go flying with Wiley, and he would teach her more about the airplane and about how to fly it. Pretty soon it became apparent to him that she was a natural. She just had a feel for it. She had no fear. She always said that the joy and the exhilaration of flying was so great that it would overshadow any possible fear you'd have. It was nothing compared to how much fun it was.
From that point on, Wiley served as a mentor to her. And he actually convinced George to buy her a plane because it would benefit George business-wise.
She flew a Curtiss Robin. It was a plane that was somewhat modeled after Lindbergh's Spirit of St. Louis. Wiley picked it out for her. He thought that was a real good plane for her. And then she was in school one day when she heard it fly over. and heard 2 planes fly over, and she knew that it was Wiley and his friends bringing her plane to her. So she couldn't wait to get out of there and go see it. And George actually hired another pilot in the area who taught her more.
Pearl soloed, got her beginner's license, and became the nation's youngest licensed flyer.
By age 12, she was flying, and flying solo. She was a commercial pilot, flew businessmen from town to town by the time she was 14, and barnstorming as well.
She had Marlowe painted on the underside of the wings in big red letters so she could fly over and at football games and different things. She'd talk her friends into go flying with her. She'd usually just scare the heck out of them. Oftentimes so badly that they wouldn't fly with her anymore because she'd do the dives and the flips and the rolls and the stunts.
Taught me what a barrel roll was. Tell me about it. Use her hands, how to do it, all this.
And her mother wouldn't fly with her because she scared her. But she just couldn't resist doing the tricks.
She was taking these parachutists up at these barnstorm shows and all that. They were jumping out of the plane. And this one talked her into jumping out. My grandfather got word of it. He called my grandmother and they went out to the airport just as they were fixing to get into the plane. He put a stop to that right then.
She became a crowd favorite in southern Oklahoma and North Texas, at barnstorming events and air circuses. She was also in demand at air shows, airport openings, festivals, and at other business-related celebrations.
Wiley Post invited Pearl to come to Oklahoma City. He was going to be in town, and so she flew her plane up and landed at an airport in South Oklahoma City. Wiley, however, was out at the north part of town, so they ended up having to drive out there to where the festivities were. When it was over, Wiley suggested that, why don't I just fly you back down to your plane? And so they got in the airplane, and he basically told her, oh, and you're going to fly the Winnie Mae. With the Winnie Mae, the trickiest part of that airplane was taking off and especially landing. She did it flawlessly. Later in life, she realized no one else had ever flown that plane and never did except for Wiley and his chief mechanic. He was notorious for not letting anybody fly his airplane. He didn't trust very many people, but he trusted her because he knew that she, as he put it, was just a natural flyer. Scotty's family lived out on a farm outside of Marlowe, but would come to town on Saturdays. And I think that she was just downtown and met Scotty. And they obviously liked each other, and so they started arranging to meet at the drugstore. There was a drugstore there that they'd meet and have a Coke or whatever. And the relationship grew from there.
Dad had, growing up, Dad farmed. He was a farmer. He and Mother were dating. Mother would be in an airplane, fly on. She'd catch Daddy, see him down there plowing with a team of horses. She'd just buzz him with that airplane. Of course, the horses weren't too cordial to that airplane, buzz them around. Daddy would get highly excited about it.
When she decided to get married, she knew that her parents wouldn't approve because she was so young, 16. So they essentially eloped and then announced that they were married. Father didn't like it, and there was a little period of time there where there was a little bit of estrangement, but that didn't last very long. They couldn't stay mad at Pearl.
After she got married and had her first child, she began to rethink the safety of flying because she knew that once she was in the air, she was never going to stop doing the stunts. It was just in her blood. She was a daredevil. She knew it. But she gave up something that she loved because the people she loved needed her, and she wanted to be there for her family.
She had 2 sons and a daughter. Louise was the oldest. and then Bill, and then Carter. She doted on her children. She once said that she had 3 careers: aviation, public service to the Chickasaw Nation, and motherhood, and of the 3, motherhood was the most important. She was in her father's business office. Some people came in, and they were coming to see George about some matter. And on the way, they heard the news, and when they came into the office, they said, "Have you heard?" And they said, "No, what?" Wiley Post and Will Rogers were killed, plane accident. And so really hit her hard. And then only a year later, George died, and that was just crushing as well.
That's one small step for man.
When Neil Armstrong, the Apollo crew, landed on the moon, and he was the first person to walk on the moon, she remembered that Wiley had told her in the early 30s that one of these days we'll land on the moon and man will walk on the moon. And she said, "When?" And he said, "Probably not in my lifetime, but it will happen." And so when that happened, of course, she flashed back to that and went out and looked at the moon while Armstrong was out there on it, and had all these emotions and feelings that came over her then. Pearl, of course, had married and at age 16, and in the 30s lived on a farm with her husband, trying to make a living in the Great Depression, trying to keep cattle alive. I mean, they'd dig down in this dry creek bed to hopefully get a little water to come up so the cattle could get something to drink.
It was hard times. In a lot of ways, we really didn't realize it because Mother canned fruit and vegetables and meat. And we always had something to eat. And there was a lot of people that didn't have. Hobos would come by the doors begging for food or just for any kind of work to make some money to be able to eat.
And by the time that the 30s ended, they had lost their farms. Scotty had to go to work in the oil fields to make ends meet. He was a pipe fitter. Pearl was left home with the kids alone. She had to raise them, manage the household, and she also worked outside the home. She had various jobs at different times. She worked in a grocery store, she worked in a cafe, she was a realtor's secretary. She did a number of things, and she worked very, very long hours, but she was determined to make things work.
By the time her kids were out of high school and gone, they had very little, she and her husband, and their house burned down, and everything in it was destroyed. And they got a little house trailer and went from job to job and lived in that for a while. I think the strains of all of that finally caught up with them, and she divorced her husband.
Scotty had just been away from home too much. Pearl missed him, and she didn't really have much hope that, that she would have the husband at home that she had always wanted. She did remarry, and that did not work out. She came to regret her divorce from Scotty.
And she told me one time, while I was back home visiting and everything, that she had these dreams about where Daddy would come into her dreams and tell her he's okay.
She was on her own, had virtually nothing. And, from this glamorous childhood of being an aviatrix and being renowned. And it was that point her philosophy of never give up really kicked in, and she didn't. She went to a training center in Tucson, Arizona, where they trained people to be the community health representatives. And there she met representatives from Indian tribes all over the United States and learned to enjoy their history and cultures, music, dance. Became fascinated then by her own heritage and began working 12 to 14-hour days, sometimes longer, out in the field trying to help with health matters, but also if they needed assistance in figuring out how to access help from the tribe or from somewhere else. That was her job. So she did that faithfully.
You know, to be a CHR, it takes a special person, and Pearl was a special person. She was really dedicated to her people, and she was the only one in that area. Back then, we were spaced out pretty far. I had our office in our cars, and the people knew that if they came to her, she would get them help some way.
And because she worked face to face with those individuals, when the opportunity came for Pearl to serve as a legislator for the Chickasaw Nation, the people already knew her and trusted her, so it wasn't that much of a stretch for her to win a seat.
She knew the issues, and I remember one that we didn't agree on, and she said, "Frank, have you read that resolution?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "Have you read it all the way through?" And a lot of times I'd talk to her, and then after I read the whole resolution, I agreed with her. She never went back on her word. Whatever she said, that's where it was. And when she walked through the door, we all stopped. Same way with kids. She's working with the kids, trying to get them off of alcohol and drugs, and just kids in general. And Pearl really had that sense. I mean, when she walked in, the kids just quieted down.
She was elected in '83 and was out for a term, and then she was elected again and served 2 more terms. And then when she left office, Governor Anatubby didn't want to lose the benefit of her involvement and help, so he made her governor's representative in Marlow.
At age 78, Pearl felt it was time to retire. Now it was time for the world to recognize her life and service.
She was very, very happy when it came time for her to retire. She worked for Governor Anatubby pretty much the rest of her life. Loved the idea that she was still doing something of value, of use to the people. But she also had some time to enjoy with her sisters and brother George and other elements of the family. She got to go tour the Smithsonian Institution, and particularly the Aviation Museum, where she saw the Winnie Mae. A flood of memories of Wiley and her father back in the days when she was learning how to fly, and she realized that she still missed them.
Her aviation accomplishments had gone virtually unrecognized for about 60 years. In the mid-1990s, an historian learned of Pearl's exceptional life, and word quickly spread. She was nominated and accepted into the Oklahoma Aviation and Space Hall of Fame, and was named to the Chickasaw Nation Hall of Fame in the same year. She also received several other notable honors and recognitions over the next few years. In the spring of 2005, with her health failing, Pearl entered the intensive care unit in an Oklahoma City hospital. She told the nurse that she was secure in her faith and knew that her time was near. The next day, March 28, 2005, Pearl Carter Scott passed away in her sleep.
It was the 4th of July, and she was elected the queen of this 4th of July celebration, and she rode down the main street of Marlow in a car with an old doctor that lived here all of his life. And they had the crowning, and she reached over and she kissed the doctor.
She just had that swagger about her that she was not going to blink. And she could walk into a room. She was not big by any means, but she had that swagger and that charisma. And when she walked into a room, you had to take notice.
There's some people that when they come in, their countenance radiates and lights up the place. She was that way. She had that feeling that she was going to do something with her life. And her accomplishments were amazing, really.
Something makes me think about Pearl pretty much every day. And she's an inspiration in a lot of ways.
Anytime Mother was given a task, she did it till its complete end. She did not believe in cutting corners, and they do it right. And you keep doing it till you got it right.
She's history. Pearl is history. And I feel part of it because I met her.
She was always, I'd say, on top of the world.
She'll be remembered as a pioneer in aviation, 13-year-old aviator, young Chickasaw girl, less than 5 foot tall, flying airplanes. It was a unique time in our history because we'll never see that again. I hope that she will be remembered, and I trust that she will, for far more than that, because I think the courage she showed in the rest of her life, dealing with what she had to deal with, may have surpassed the courage she showed as an aviator.
That if you fall down, don't lay down there. You get up and show people that you can do what you want to. And you can if you want to.